Sometimes we don't get what we ask for in prayer and we assume God isn't giving us what we ask for. More often, he gives us what we need in ways that we didn't ask for. So we've got to be very careful when we think about prayer, because it's a powerful thing, because God is a God of power. And, sometimes if people notice some of my scars and ask what happened, I might quip, I prayed for maturity. Because you just want to be more mature. But God sends you something that will mature you. That's why we should be careful to pray for patience, because we just want to be more patient. But God will send us something where we need to be patient. Well, let's turn to Luke. There's not really a link to that so much. Let's look at Luke. Chapter 12, verse 35. If you knew the exact time a thief was coming to rob your house, what would you do? You'd probably lock the doors, wouldn't you, at the very least? Make sure all the windows are shut. Maybe you'd call the police and tell them. Maybe you'd put the dog in the yard, or some of you, maybe you'd make sure the dog wasn't in the yard. Maybe you'd find a weapon to protect yourself and your family. You'd prepare, wouldn't you? Well, what if you knew that they were coming, but you didn't know exactly when? And you think, would it make that much of a difference? You'd still want to be ready, wouldn't you? The overriding theme in these verses in Luke is that time is short and people should prepare. It's not about digging a bunker in your backyard and stocking it with non-perishable food and water. It's not just about making sure you've got a will in place should something unfortunate happen. It's about making sure that when you meet Jesus, which could happen at any time, you're ready. Either we're going to die first or he's going to come back. Those are the options. So are you ready? This morning we're going to look at 3 warnings that Jesus has about the times we live in, and 3 sweet, sweet encouragements about himself. The first warning is this: be ready. Look at verses 35 to 48. Be ready. The Master is coming back. Now, Christians living after the ascension of Christ, that's when we're alive, we live in a time period that ends with Jesus' return. Now, that's wonderful for anyone who belongs to him. But we don't know, do we, when our time is up. Anyone who thinks they do is kidding themselves and trying to fool you. They're setting themselves up as being better informed than Jesus if they've worked out when he's coming back. That's a good reason to not listen to them if they think they know better than Jesus. Now, we might get our timetables out. It might not be so precise, but we might say, well, this or that needs to happen before Jesus can return. But Jesus doesn't humour any of that popular prophecy nonsense. His warning is this: be ready. Be ready now, because you don't know when the Master will return. Whatever it is that you want him to find you doing when he comes back, be doing that now, because he could be back at any time and you don't want to get caught napping. We've all experienced this, I'm sure. Your parents left you to do some chore at home, tidy your room, and then they go out. And what do? Anything but that, right? You don't want to tidy your room. But if you knew when they were coming back, you could go and be doing it then, so you got found doing what they told you to do when they left. But what if you don't know when they're coming back? Now, as Christians, we should be ready to receive Jesus. We want to prove ourselves as worthy servants. We don't want to just be like kids trying to avoid doing the work until the last possible minute. We want to be doing it because he's the one who's given us this job. We want to look like we're pleased to see him. I wonder sometimes if we, even as mature Christians sometimes, we get so taken up with our own life plans that we'd see the second coming of Christ as a bit of an inconvenience. You know, it'd mess up all the things we've set our minds on what we're going to do. But there should be nothing that gives us more eager, hopeful expectation. And of all the doctrines of the Christian faith, I think the return of Christ is probably spoken about more often in the New Testament than anything else. I'm not basing that on much, but it was certainly, it's much more present in the New Testament than it is the way we talk and live as Christians. It is the hope we should all be longing for. It's the arrival of absolute and final justice. It's the end of all the evil in the world. Now, just looking at the news this week, don't you want to see that come to an end? We want to see the ultimate vindication of Jesus' faithful servant. Every martyr that fell from Stephen onwards, we want them to be justified, vindicated, that they were proven faithful, that their lives meant something to the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm thinking about service. That's something worth noting, isn't it? Peter asks this question, and don't go too hard on Peter. This is quite a normal, not you, Peter, but other Peter. It was a normal way when a rabbi's teaching, you ask questions to get more teaching. So it's not just, he's not betraying his ignorance. We want to beat up on the Apostle Peter for this, but he's asking a question. This is how rabbis taught. Lord, are you telling this parable to us, as in the disciples, or to everyone, as in all the crowds that have gathered to listen? And in typical fashion, Jesus does and doesn't reply. Instead of giving a straightforward yes or no, which you'd think it's an easy enough question, isn't it? Is this teaching for the disciples or for everyone, including the disciples? And Jesus doesn't say yes or no, he tells another parable. And the meaning of this parable is that those servants who are entrusted with greater responsibility are held in some ways to a higher standard. Now, you see, that's one reason Jesus often doesn't give a straight answer, because he gives an answer that makes you think. Because a straight answer, you can just dismiss what he has to say. If you've got to think about it, you've got to work out where you stand. You've got to process your own thoughts, attitudes, the position of your own heart. That's what Jesus is doing here. He's teaching, once again, that the world's standard of privilege and prestige is not the kingdom. The more we receive from Jesus, the more we should share with others. Authority in the church isn't meant as an end in itself, who gets to have the most robes or the biggest hat. It's meant as a means of serving others. Now, the long evidence of abuse from people calling themselves Christians shows that this is a lesson we need to hear. Jesus is coming back, and we should be ready, even if it seems like he's taking his time. Apparent delay is no justification for faithlessness within God's household. Oh, we were talking about this before, weren't we, brother? That when we sort of act and abuse other Christians under our responsibility, just to kind of feather our own nest or whatever, isn't that a sign that we're not expecting the master to come back? Because if we've been entrusted with care over others and then we start to abuse them, then we expect we're going to get away with it, or we wouldn't do it. It's a sign that we're not trusting that Jesus is coming back. We don't expect to be judged for the way we've treated his servants, given the authority and the responsibility that was entrusted to us. And just look at the sternness of what Jesus says. You might be offended by this, the violence of this description. He will cut him to pieces. And that was something that a master could do with a slave. You had ultimate authority over their body. If you wanted them put to death and cut into pieces, you could do that. He's using graphic language to make a point. Assign him a place with the unbelievers. So even someone, maybe even an apostle, a disciple, assigned great privilege and authority within the church. If they abuse those under their care, Jesus says, cut him into pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers? We should think, shouldn't we? But here's where we can think about the first encouragement. Jesus is coming back. Now that should be encouragement enough for those of us grieving at the brokenness of the world. But look at what he promises to do here. And like we've just seen, Jesus holds his servants to a high standard. And he expects them to be busy. But this isn't a hypocritical standard on his part. He models, doesn't he, perfect service for us. His whole life was a life of service. Philippians 2 says, he who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Just look at what the reward is promised to his faithful servants. Maybe you missed this in verse 37. Maybe you noticed it. He's talking about the master. When the master returns, he will dress himself to serve. Will have them recline at the table and will come and wait on them. Now in this ancient world that's so stratified according to position, where you have the master and you have slaves, this didn't happen. All right, this is a reversal of the way it should be, that the master, the one who has the prestige and the privilege and the power, he's the one who dresses himself like a slave and serves the slaves. The master serves the servants. He blesses them and honors them and says, you are worthy. We see Jesus do this himself. When he takes off his outer garment, he wraps himself in a towel, he takes the clothing of a slave to wash the disciples' feet. He does the least honourable task to bless those he's showing are worthy of great honour, because he gives it. The work is hard. That's what Jesus is saying. The work is hard, and he knows it firsthand. He died on a cross. He was rejected by his own. The Son of Man had no place to lay his head. The work is hard, but the rewards for faithfulness are great. We're not mercenaries. I know that. We don't serve Jesus for a reward. But isn't it good to know that there is one? As we try to serve faithful, as we try to be ready in these difficult times, Jesus wants to encourage us with all that will be ours if we stay his faithfully. Be ready. Jesus has another warning. Trouble's coming. Look at verses 49 to 53. Trouble's coming. Now, we've seen in Luke's gospel, in fact, as I was reading this before, I looked out and I could see looks of confusion as I read these verses. Jesus' mission is a mission, as he says in chapter 19, to seek and to save the lost. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost. His mission is a mission of freedom to oppressed, captive people. He proclaims the year of the Lord's favour. And Jesus, as we know from the Old Testament, is the promised Prince of Peace. That's his name in Isaiah, isn't it? The Prince of Peace. When he makes a triumphal entry in chapter 19, he rides on a donkey colt rather than a horse, as a sign that he comes to make peace, not war. You ride in on a horse when you're going to conquer. You ride in on a donkey when you've achieved the victory. You've come in to reign in peace. His whole mission, like we're going to see in a bit, is about reconciling God and rebellious mankind, about bringing all creation, and I think Luke's gospel makes this perhaps clearer than the others, that it's not just about us as humans and God, it's about all creation being restored to submission under its creator. Jesus brings peace between sinners and God, but his mission is bigger. It is cosmic peace. Peace in the heavenly realms. The death of chaos, peace and order eternally. But Jesus wants his disciples to be ready for the reality of what they're going to face in the meantime. Now, we love the hills, don't we? Have you ever been walking in the hills? Cat Bells, it's not quite what I'm talking about here, but you've got lots of false summits there. You see a summit ahead of you on the mountains, and it looks like you're almost there. And if it's a hot day and you're tired, that's a relief, isn't it? Like, well, there's a summit there, we're almost there. And you go a little farther, and suddenly you see that summit that looks so close is still miles away. It's what you call a foreshortened perspective, when the terrain ahead of you, so if you're here and the summit's there and there's a bit of a hill there blocking your view of everything in between, the landscape is invisible, so that a distant hill looks much closer than it really is. And you get the same thing with biblical prophecy. Events are described in the Old Testament that seem really close to each other. It sounds like, the prophet will say, this happens, then this happens. But those two events are separated by possibly hundreds of years or more. The first and second comings of the Messiah are like that. Two realities are described in the prophets: a suffering servant who will come, and a triumphant anointed Messiah who will undo the curse and death and bring peace. Now, that end stage, a place without suffering or grief, where a lion will lie down with a lamb, where a little child will play by a cobra's nest and the mother's not bothered because, no harm can come. The ultimate military defeat of evil and every anti-God force in the universe, that seems in places to follow immediately on from the arrival of the Messiah at his temple. It's like this, then this. But what can't be seen is this space in the middle, the centuries that separates the Messiah's arrival and the final victory. This is a foreshortened perspective, spiritually speaking. Jesus brings peace now between sinners and a holy God. And he will bring absolute peace between all creation and God then. Like the scripture says, we don't see all creation in submission to him yet, do we? In between, we're left in a period where rebellion against God continues. There are those who are sealed for that reality, and they're going to get through. We teach the perseverance of the saints in this church. They're going to get through. They are sealed. They make it to that end. But they pass through this time in between. And it's a time of division. Jesus warns the disciples, trouble is coming. Don't think that following Jesus means an easy life in this life, because often quite the opposite is true. In describing the kind of division that happens in families because of the gospel, and I think we're used to these verses, we've heard it 2 against 3 and 3 against 2, we're not quite aware of how heretical that would have sounded in his culture. And I know there are cultures, even in Europe, where this is still true. The family is the most important thing there is. It is the thing you live for. The family was a thing that no good Jew could challenge. We saw this last Sunday night with the daughters of Zelophehad. Family and tribe is so much more important than individual. So to say that the family could be disordered, that because of Jesus, 2 against 3 and 3 against 2, father against son, son against father, that's almost blasphemous. Jesus is preparing his disciples, you see, to go against the most deeply held standards of their culture. Faithfulness to Christ means rejecting the world. And that could be even our most deeply held relationships, if necessary. Perhaps the disciples are expecting that, well, Jesus is here and he's going to go into Jerusalem, he's going to proclaim the kingdom, the Romans are going to get driven out, and the end will come. And Jesus is saying, the end will come, but trouble's coming before. Now, when trouble comes, because Jesus has warned us, that means that we don't need to lose hope. We don't need to think that there's something wrong with us or wrong with Jesus because people won't receive the good news about him. When they don't want to hear it, it's not about us and them, is it? It's about them and Jesus. Jesus brings division because people reject him. And that should be encouraging to us as we try and share the gospel with others. But he offers another encouragement. You know, that's encouraging enough. Forewarned is forearmed, right? But just look at how committed Jesus is to fulfill his mission. Look at verses 49 and 50. Jesus came to bring fire, to bring judgment. And that's coming. And we don't know when. He could have brought it then. He would have been well within his rights. But he had a baptism to undergo, even though it was a baptism of suffering. I mean, apparently there are ancient texts that describe the violent siege and destruction of a city as a baptism. Jesus' whole being is constrained by the death he is to die for the people he loves. He is so committed to it. How I wish it were already kindled. What constraint I am under until it is completed. You know, Jesus is going to be firing on all cylinders until he cries out, "It is finished." Whatever is needed for the salvation of his own, he will give it, he will do it, he will go through it. That's what Jesus is like. What an encouragement to his people. Be ready. Trouble's coming. So wake up. I was thinking when I was looking at these notes last night, it would have been great if someone was asleep here, because then I could said it loud. But you're all awake. But look at verses 54 to 59. This is Jesus' final warning in these verses. Wake up. Now, it looks like people in ancient Palestine enjoyed talking about the weather almost as much as British people do. They could accurately predict the weather based on the direction of wind. And we all know this, don't we? Maybe not in the Furness Peninsula, but there's a certain predictability to repeated patterns, isn't there? Now, it might be about the weather, or it might be the economy, or when someone has a pulsing vein on their forehead that suggests they're about to lose their temper. But certain things we can predict pretty well because we've seen the patterns enough times that we can work it out for ourselves. It's what you could call folk wisdom. You know, you don't need to be that well educated, you just pick up on these patterns and you know the way things fall. And from this we can give ourselves the impression that we can predict everything. We know how the world works. We've got all our ducks in a row and nothing will ever surprise us. But speaking to this crowd, Jesus rebukes them for not properly responding to his teaching. They claim this folk wisdom. They claim in a way to be wise, to be able to understand the way things are. But how come they can't see what's happening in his ministry then? How come there can be Pharisees and Sadducees who don't believe who he is? How come you can have a man who thinks he's another rabbi and so he's someone who can come and sort out your financial affairs? How come they can see the lame walking, the blind seeing, and the dead being raised to life and not know from the Bible what that means? It's hypocrisy, he says. It is godlessness. They are self-deceived and their ignorance has no excuse. Now this ties back to what he said in verse 47 about the servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants. Because think of Peter's question now. Is this for them or us? Is this for us or them? Is it for apostles and disciples in position of authority, or is it for ordinary people? And Jesus says, well, what do you think? Have you been entrusted with much or with little? Of what has been entrusted with you, how will you answer for it? There are consequences to foolish complacency. to claiming that you understand how the world works, but never thinking to get ready for the fact that God will judge you one day. Now, there's a lot of wickedness and blatant sin in our culture, but most of the people around us are decent enough. They're just trying to get on with their lives without doing too much harm to anyone else. If you ask them, if you get the chance, if they've given any thought to religion or to Jesus, and most of them say something like, I'm all right, thanks, I'm fine. You believe what you want to, that's fine, good for you, but I'm okay. Don't we know that there is something fundamentally wrong with the world? It's baffling in a way, isn't it? That we could look at the news and just, have you thought about what happens when you die? Have you thought about the direction this world, that human culture is going in? And you ask them that and they, no, I'm okay, I'm fine, thank you. I'm content with the way things are. It's baffling, isn't it? There are wars and rumours of wars, there is famine and disease, and we can say, I'm fine. That's just the way the world is. Because it shouldn't be. Do we think that we're so wise that we can't understand that we're living in a world heading for fire and that we need to do something about that? Do we think that our lives are so mundane that we won't have to answer to the living God for how we've misused the gifts that he's so kindly putting into our hands? Are we so cynical to think that there is no such thing as justice and that things will just carry on the way they are doing until the heat death of the universe and none of it all mattered anyway? Now we know, I have to add this caution, we know that the world is heading for fire. All things will be burnt up. The Apostle Peter writes about that. But Jesus is telling us how we should live in the meantime. Because there are Christians who will teach, because the world's heading for fire, frankly, it's a kind of spiritual cynicism. It's like, it just doesn't matter what's going to happen. So trash the environment, trash anything you want. God's going to remake it anyway, so, it doesn't matter. Pollute, who cares? And that spills over into the way we think about people as well. Because it was like, here's the gospel, they reject it, and we're like, well, they're just going to burn anyway. Why waste the breath? Jesus does not teach fatalism. He teaches kingdom. We know this world is going to burn, and we know that our actions can't save it. However much you recycle, we don't stop the world from ending in fire. But that doesn't mean that we don't live out faithful lives as stewards of God who've been entrusted with much. We can't misuse what's been given to us. We'll be beaten with many blows, says Jesus. Now, we shouldn't try to read too much into that parable or the parable that he tells in verses 57 to 59, but we need to understand that there are serious consequences to come for those who don't make arrangements, and that there is a limited time in which to seek the solution. But the encouragement hidden in this little gem of a parable, just stuck in at the end of this passage, is to remind us again of just what Jesus' mission is all about. He's talking about reconciliation. Now, in the parable, we imagine a debtor who owes so much, he's never going to repay it. And this is where you don't want to read too much into these parables. That's how they come up with justifications of the doctrine of purgatory and all kinds of just false stuff. But here's a man who owes so much, he can't repay it. So until you've repaid the last penny, it's just like, you're not going to get out of there. You're going to be stuck in prison forever. But there's a hope of settling up on the way. No sentence has been passed. You're still out of jail. You've still got a chance to sort things out. But Jesus came to reconcile God and mankind. Isn't that just something hidden? It's not the teaching of these passages, but it's hidden in there. He came to undergo a baptism of suffering to pay the debt that we owe to God. In using this language of debt and payment, he's saying there's something that can be settled here. He wouldn't say, settle with your adversary on the way because God won't forgive you. That doesn't follow. He's saying, this can be sorted, but you better sort it now while there's time. He's the one who settles our account, and he does it so abundantly, so perfectly, that there's nothing that we need to add, and with such a liberality that we can never exhaust it. There is more grace in God than sin in us. There is full reconciliation in Jesus if only we ask for it, and the time to ask for it is now. Because we don't know when we'll get to the judge, be handed over to the officer, and thrown into jail. There are serious consequences to complacency, to thinking we're fine, that things are fine. But there is hope and salvation in Jesus Christ. So wake up. Be ready. Trouble's coming, so wake up. Now, Jesus is coming back at an unknown time. For all the division and strife in between, he is coming, and he will make everything right. Do we know that we've settled accounts with him today? Do we know that we're living as faithful servants, keeping on working until we can welcome him and receive everything he's promised us? The time is short. It might be a long time, it might not. But one thing's for sure, it is shorter now than it was. If you knew a thief was coming, you'd prepare, wouldn't you? How are you using the time you have left until Jesus arrives? Well, let me ask, what would you do differently if you knew he was coming back tomorrow? Because who's to say that he won't? Let's sing our final hymn, number 206.